Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is John Martin, and I am Technical Director with Cambridge Education. I have more than 25 years of experience of working with teachers across the developing world. Today, I am going to give you some of my reflections about teacher performance. I am going to put forward three main arguments, which I will try to justify as I go through my presentation. I will also provide some suggestions along the way as to what we can do to mitigate some of the issues that I raise. My first argument is that by focusing so strongly on teacher development over the past 20 years, we have collectively allowed ourselves to be distracted from the main goal of improving teacher performance. We often talk about improving teachers or creating more effective teachers, and in so doing, we imply we want them to perform better. However, by not making the word performance explicit, I think we allow ourselves to forget that performance is not just a function of training. My second argument is that even when working on teacher development, the focus has been mainly on in-service training. Initial teacher training has been largely neglected. And thirdly, that most of the in-service training currently offered is largely remedial, in that it seeks to deliver the training that should have been given during initial teacher training. So what are these factors affecting teacher performance? This diagram gives a pictorial representation of these factors and their interaction with one another. First of all, yes, development and training is an important factor, but is not the only factor. Motivation and morale are also important. Does the teacher want to perform well? And if not, why not? There are intrinsic motivators, such as job satisfaction or feeling appreciated and respected, and there are extrinsic motivators, such as pay and conditions, and the way in which a teacher might progress along his or her career path. Both are important, and in practice, they are interlinked. If I perform well, and I am not rewarded with promotion, I'm likely to feel unappreciated. This leads to the fact that incentives and rewards that might be accessible to me need to be linked to my performance. Otherwise, why do they matter? But my performance must be judged by others, so I must be accountable for them. And if I am rewarded with promotion, then I should expect additional responsibilities. So let's look in more detail at each of these factors, starting with professional development, and within that, let's look at in-service training first. Let's ask ourselves, what are the common characteristics of the in-service training programs that we currently deliver? Well, most models of in-service training have tended to be intensive, expensive, and therefore unsustainable in the long term. Structured and truly sustainable systems of CPD are rare in most ESA countries. Most in-service training is driven and funded by donors. In most ESA countries, in-service training is largely remedial. It is not really CPD because it seeks to impart skills that should have been developed during initial teacher training rather than build on skills already developed. We've been poor at gathering evidence that this training has impact on children's learning. There is at best moderate evidence that some inset programs have influenced teacher performance in terms of learning outcomes of children, but this is generally not a large impact. Neither do we have evidence that even these small gains are sustainable. Yet we spend enormous sums of money on such training. This chart shows the proportion of funds spent by 5 large DFID programs managed by my own organisation over the past 20 years. This proportion averages between 30 to 40%. I'm fairly sure that a similar pattern would be seen across UNICEF's own programs, and some donors, such as USAID, probably spend far larger proportions of their program funds on in-service training. We should therefore ask the questions: does the impact that in-service training has had justify the cumulative amount that has been spent on in-service training over the past few decades? And what can we do that would be more sustainable in the long term? I would suggest that we should focus on developing low-cost systems of in-service training that can be sustained rather than expensive one-shot injections of training. and that in practice this means developing school-based CPD systems that schools can implement themselves with minimal external support. Such programs usually involve short peer-to-peer training conducted regularly on an inset day or half a day, once a week or once a fortnight. They are usually facilitated by an in-school mentor who is either a senior teacher or the head teacher. This person will have been given training to fulfill this role and will be supplied with training materials and/or handbooks to guide them. Where it is possible, local supervisors or other professional support staff are co-opted to help coordinate and drive the system, especially in schools where it appears to be falling down. These models are no cost or low cost after their initial setup. Such models of inset are becoming more common. However, we should all be reminded not to repeat the mistakes of the past. As we trial such models, we need to collect evidence that these models work better than previous, more expensive models, i.e., they create sustainable and increasing improvement of teacher performance measured by improved learning outcomes of children. So what about initial teacher training? Initial teacher training is where teachers should develop a foundation of skills and knowledge that they can build on for the rest of their careers. But the ongoing crisis in learning in Africa clearly implies that this is not happening. Yet in the past 20 years, it is hard to find examples of projects or programs that have focused on reform of initial teacher training. So we might ask ourselves, what are the characteristics of initial teacher training systems in East and Southern African countries? In the next few slides, I will give a set of generic characteristics. Clearly, not all of these characteristics apply to every ESA country, but I believe about 70 to 80% apply to most. I will start with some pedagogical characteristics. Courses are generally content-laden, and worse still, the main focus is on remedial content teaching. There is a general tendency to repeat the content from senior secondary school in the belief that students did not learn this sufficiently well the first time around. This might be true, but then either they should not have been admitted to a teacher training institution, or they should have completed some sort of foundation year before proceeding to professional training. It is not the job of ITT institutions to remediate the failure of secondary schools. What pedagogy is included is generally very theoretical. The pedagogy is focused on theories of teaching rather than on practical strategies and has little link to the realities of the classroom. Often, even this theoretical training is outmoded and outdated. Pedagogy and practice teaching often make up less than half of the curriculum. Often, there is no differentiation between training to teach at different age ranges. In some countries, students are trained to be either primary or secondary teachers. This creates a crammed timetable and greatly reduces the time available to train them to do either properly. Often, there are no specific courses on either literacy or numeracy. These are sometimes subsumed into generic maths or English courses, where they receive only a small amount of attention, or worse still, do not appear at all. Practice teaching is usually in a single block, poorly supported and monitored and not linked to pedagogical courses. Often students are left to their own devices and pick up bad habits from existing teachers. The curriculum is set externally, usually by a single university or institution. This creates significant inertia and resistance to change in the system. Not only is an outmoded curriculum protected by academics who have no real idea of what teaching in a primary school entails, but it creates vested interests that conspire against change. In many countries, examinations are set and marked externally every semester or every year. This is very expensive and adds to the vested interests just mentioned. In one country, which I will not name, more than a third of the university's total income comes from this source. There are also a number of institutional characteristics of ITT institutions in ESA countries. Most courses consist of a 2 or 3 year residential program. This is very expensive, and to spend this much money, governments should want to be sure that they are getting bang for their bucks, i.e., they need to know that these institutions are doing a good job. They do not, and they are not. Supply is rarely matched to demand, either in the total number of teachers or in specific subject areas. Few countries have processes or controls to ensure that they get the right number of the right teachers. ITT institutions have low levels of autonomy. For example, in many countries, staff are posted to the college, not appointed by the college, and they are paid for from a central payroll. They do not set their own curriculum or exams. In some countries, they do not even recruit their own students. These are allocated centrally, but even then the supply is not matched to the demand. Staff are usually required to have a degree or higher degree, but this is often subject-based rather than professionally based. For instance, they might have degrees in maths or physics or English, but rarely do they have a B.Ed in primary education or early childhood. Experience of having taught in a school is often not required of ITT tutors. For example, very few of those responsible for training primary teachers have primary school teaching experience themselves. There is little or no external quality assurance of ITT institutions, and hence there is no drive to improve or compete with others. There is no tracking of trainees after graduation. This is a missed opportunity to measure the effectiveness of their courses and/or their trainers and improve them, assuming of course that they have the autonomy to do this. Large proportions of students never end up becoming teachers at all. This is an incredible waste of resources in countries that cannot afford such waste. The worst qualified teachers end up teaching at the lowest grade levels. This is completely illogical. The evidence suggests that good teaching has the greatest impact in the earliest years. And there is absolutely no evidence that any of this produces effective teachers. Indeed, in many ESA countries, learning levels have been getting worse rather than better, which suggests that this training is having no impact whatsoever. Poor countries cannot afford to waste such large sums of money to no effect. In most ESA countries, reform of initial teacher training is long overdue. There is a need to think innovatively about this to produce training models that are both better and are better value for money. So what can we do? First, we should find out more. More research is needed into the effectiveness and cost of current systems versus the effectiveness of alternative or innovative systems. Then there are several alternative options for reform. We can work within the confines of the existing 2 to 3 year residential training model and try to strengthen or reform the existing systems by fixing the various elements and issues listed above. For example, revise the curriculum and break the strangleholds held by single universities, create more relevant selection criteria for staff of colleges and professionalize their career structures, and increase levels of autonomy in ITT institutions. Nigeria and Ghana are attempting to do this and are being quite radical about it. Ghana, for instance, has just developed a new curriculum vastly different from the existing curriculum and much more practically orientated. Colleges will soon have a choice of universities with which to affiliate. These changes are currently going through government approval processes. It is therefore still too early to evaluate the impact of these reforms, but realistically, they cannot produce worse results than before. Or we could innovate and look at completely different models of ITT. For example, college-based models of training that include much stronger partnerships with schools. Typically, such models include much greater periods of time spent in schools by the trainee teachers, generally more than 50% and sometimes up to 70%. They also involve the use of school mentors who are trained and paid additional allowances by the ITT institution. Or we could consider school-based models of ITT. These systems are very similar to those just described, but the main difference is in the ownership of the trainee. In these models, prospective teachers are recruited by schools themselves, who then have the overall responsibility for their training. They do this with a combination of mentoring plus day release or short residential courses purchased from ITT institutions. This also requires that mentors are trained and schools have partnerships with ITT institutions. The advantage is that schools get to hire and develop the sorts of teachers they want. This is quite a sophisticated model, however, and in the first instance, I would not expect more than a few schools to be capable of being in charge to this extent. Worth thinking about, however. Finally, we could consider combining ITT and INSET into a lifelong system of CPD. It would be possible to combine any reformed system of ITT, including the two just described, with an in-school CPD model to create a lifelong system of regular professional development. If this includes strong partnerships with autonomous ITT institutions, then there might also be the potential for teachers to also upgrade their qualifications as they go. Now let's look at some of the other factors affecting teacher performance. This diagram shows how some of the earlier factors I mentioned that might be linked inside a teacher career structure. Within this, there should be a strong link between performance and progression along a teacher's career path. There also needs to be a strong link between progression and the roles and responsibilities that teachers are expected to play. And responsibility brings greater accountability. And this diagram is an attempt to show how such factors might be arranged into a cycle of continual improvement of performance. Starting off with professional development, this should give a teacher the skills to perform better. His or her performance should, however, be actively managed by the head teacher or other senior teachers, and that implies greater accountability. It should also lead to greater responsibility. This should be aligned to the rewards and incentives available in the teacher's career pathway, resulting in promotion and/or more pay. That in turn motivates the teacher both extrinsically, more pay, and intrinsically, his or her good performance is recognized and appreciated. I should add here, if other teachers are promoted without performing as well or working as hard, then this is extremely demotivating. In fact, this negative effect probably outweighs the potential positive effect of promotion. And finally, this feeds the teacher's ambition to do better still, which creates the desire for further professional development. And around we go again. But what do we see in practice? Let's look at this example of a career structure from Ghana. The first thing to note is that in the column on the right, labeled competencies, apart from the fact that these are not competencies, there is a great use of the word can, which I have highlighted in yellow. So that, for example, a senior teacher can perform professional duties at school or cluster level, but does not necessarily have to. A principal teacher can be the head of a primary school, but might not be. This means that two individuals might be on the same grade with the same pay, but have greatly different levels of responsibility and be required to work much harder. This is intrinsically unfair to the person who has taken on extra responsibility. The second thing to note is that in column 1, progression is purely linear and is time-bound. It takes 27 years to rise from the lowest grade to the highest grade, and it is not possible to move more quickly than this, no matter how good you are. Worse still, as long as you do not do anything too wrong, you will probably move through this progression whether or not you perform particularly well. i.e., progression is not really linked to performance, but to age. Many countries in the SA have similar career structures. So what about the associated rewards? This diagram shows the salary scale for teachers in Uganda side by side with that of UK. However, I'm not comparing the absolute values of the teachers' salaries in each country, as that would be pointless. What I am comparing is the relative levels of salaries at each level of career progression. In Uganda, a head teacher at the top of the scale with 20 to 30 years of hard work only receives 1.95 the salary of a newly qualified teacher. In UK, the multiplier is 4.8. While there is little direct evidence that this will increase motivation, it is not an unreasonable hypothesis to make. If I am a beginning teacher looking up, I know that if I work hard and do well, the rewards will be considerable. This might be even more important to me when I reach mid-career, as I then have a family to support and many other responsibilities. For a head teacher looking down, I feel that I have not only achieved a great deal, but this has been properly recognised and rewarded. I feel that I should keep on giving rather than feeling regretful of my choice of career. So what can we do about this? Options for improving these aspects of performance management are more difficult, but they do exist. It is possible to improve intrinsic motivation with soft measures at the school level. These might include organising self-reflection groups for teachers, listening to their concerns, helping them with external problems where possible, or actions that show appreciation of their efforts. Some NGOs, such as STIR, have developed mechanisms to do this. The ultimate success in terms of extrinsic motivation would be to persuade governments to realign teacher career structures so that their progression is linked to performance. This would involve them also taking on greater responsibility and accountability. The development of such a career structure would not be difficult technically, but will be difficult politically. It can only happen when such political will exists. The trick is to be ready and able to spot it when it does. We as outsiders do not make these decisions, so all we can do is either try to influence the agenda or take the opportunity if there comes a time when a very senior political figure is committed to change. We therefore have to be ready when such opportunities present themselves, and if they do, we should be ready to support governments to deal with the many barriers that they will face. For example, we could help to create a dialogue with teachers' unions to bring them on board and show them that they too will reap the benefits from such reforms. If major reform is not possible, then we can work within the system to make it work better. For example, we could support local authorities to develop stronger recruitment, appraisal and deployment systems. We can help ensure head teachers are involved in decisions about their teachers' career progression. We can explore whether head teachers can be given more direct authority over their teachers, including the power to sanction poor behaviours. In conclusion, I would reiterate that if we want better performing teachers, then we must address all of the various aspects affecting their performance simultaneously. We must also change the way that we approach teacher development in the ways that I have suggested. Thank you.